Okay, I don't normally do requests, don't usually get a chance to do them, but a couple of people have asked about this, and it was something that was interesting in doing myself. So a while ago I made a tutorial on creating a flickering light in Unreal and just having that going around, creating a randomized value, cycling round. And I had a couple of people ask if we can match up the emissive value from a material and actually have that syncing along with a flashing light. So I've done that. So we've got this emissive material, and the glow on that is being powered by the same value that's actually triggering the flickering of the light. Okay. So there we go. So the script is exactly the same as before. We have exactly the same script for this. But we just need to set up the light in a slightly different way. And I also cover this looking at blueprint classes as well. So what I'm going to do, I'll just start from scratch really. So the first thing I'm going to do is just right click and I'm going to create a new blueprint class. Now these are really useful. We can actually combine quite a few objects within this and add some functionality to it and have it all self-contained. So the pig parent class, I'm just going to click actor and just rename this, and let's call this BC for blueprint class. Let's call it flicker. Okay, that's our blueprint class. I'm going to double click on this. And just bring this from my other monitor. So right now we have nothing on this. What I'm going to do is going to add a few components. I'm going to adding a light, obviously. So just dragging a point light on there. That's just to put it into the middle of this environment, and I'll stick to the intensity because I'm going to change that anyway. Let's just give this a color. Let's say add a bit of a yellow on that. Okay. I'm also going to just put on here, now I could get a mesh in there as well. We had one of the light bulb or the lamp, but just for the sake of this, I'm just going to put a sphere in here. Let me just shrink this down. Oh, why scale wasn't coming on then. So I'm just going to bring that down a little bit. I'm going to rename this. For the sake of this, I'm going to call this, say, bulb. Okay. And then we need to create a material. I'm just going to compile and save this quickly. I'll go in and I will make a new material. So let's just drag that out of the way for a second. So I'm going to right click. I have one already, but I'll make a new one. So I'll make a material. Let's call this trying to not use the same names. So I'll call it bulb light. And I'm just going to put that material on the particular thing. So let's double click on this. Again, I'll just bring this over. Yeah. So I'm just going to use a 3 vector. So I'll press 3 on the keyboard, left click to add our 3 vector in. Let's just give this a color. Again, let's just make this a yellowish. I'm going to drag this into the base color. And for the emissive color, I'm going to use the same thing, but I'm going to multiply that by a value. So I'm going to take this value out, put it into A, take this out, and plug this into the emissive color. And then we're just going to have a scalar value here. So I'm just going to press 1 on the keyboard and click down to create a 1 constant. And let's plug this in. And the important thing about this is I'm going to parameterize this, so this can be custom changed, because we're going to use instance materials for this. So I'm going to right click, convert to parameter. Let's give this a parameter name of emissive strength. Need to remember that name as well. We're going to refer to that later. And right now I will leave the default value at 0, and so that's kind of off completely, and then just save that. Okay, so that's my light. So I'm going to make a material instance of this. So I'm going to right click and create material instance, and I'll just leave it the name, so mbulblight underscore inst for instance. And what we need to do is actually use that on our bulb. So I'm going to go back to my blueprint class light flicker and just drag this across. And make sure I've got my bulb selected. So we can see this. I'm going to, this is the one I want to use. So with that selected, in my content browser, I can just come into here, and on our materials, we can just click on use selected asset. So whatever we've got selected, that's just going to bring this in. Or we could drag and drop that in as well. So that's going to use this bulb light instance. Okay, let's just compile and save that. So that's our initial light setup. If I just grab this one in here and just delete that, and I'm going to bring my light flicker one in instead. If you wanted, I could go in and give this a start value of 0, but the script should trigger off straight away, so it should be okay. But that's our light in there. Okay, so currently, if I just press play, that should just be static. We have no emissive glow on our material yet, because we've not put that in. So, let's get into the main things about this. So, back to my blueprint class now. And the first thing we want to do is we want to create a script that basically tells this material, or this material going to be up here, that what we're going to create is a dynamic instance of this. So using the material instance, I'm going to grab this and be able to dynamically change that. I should note as well, as with the other tutorial, that the point light itself, if you've not watched the flickering light, the point light itself is set to be movable. That's important, otherwise you can't make that flash real time. So in this blueprint class we have a couple of things. The viewport is where we put together our elements. So if you had something like a door, or you wanted a door frame and a door within that to open, you could put those both in there and put them in the right place. So you can build up different types of complex objects to be able to interact with. We have our event graph, which is where we're going to put our code, but we also have this construction script. What this allows you to do is kind of trigger off initial values for your blueprint class. It's almost defining the properties straight away when it's created. So I'm going to go into this construction script. Now this is essentially an event handler that basically says when this object is made, when it's used in the viewport, then whatever is being triggered from this will just happen straight away. Okay. So the material is on this bulb object, and that's what we want to get. So I'm going to drag this out and drag it into the screen. Okay. Just going to drag out an instance, and then I'm going to drag from this point. I'm going to type in, and if we type in actually dynamic, I can spell dynamic. Dynamic, we get this create dynamic material instance, and that's the one that we want. So I'm just going to click on that. Okay, so this is creating, basically it's storing this dynamic element, or making this material a dynamic material that's in index 0. So this you may have to change if you have more than one material on your object. In this example, I'm only using the one material. Okay, so let's plug this in to here, and then we also need to be able to work with this. I just drag these so we can see a little better. So what I want to do is return this value as a variable as well. So if I just right click over this pin for the return value, we can promote to variable. And just within here, this is creating a variable name. I'm just going to do this, and I'll call this dynamic mat for material. Okay, so let's give us a variable within here. That's all done. Let's just compile and save that. So this isn't still going to do anything right now, but this is just setting up the material so that we can work with it. Okay. Let's go into my event graph now. So this is going to be the actual script that makes this work. So I'm going to start with the event begin play. So this is going to trigger off the event as soon as basically the player starts. We're going to have this create what we need to create. So I need an instance from this point light, so I'm going to drag this point light out to the scene so we can reference that. And this is a nice thing about Blueprint classes. We're referencing everything from within this, so we don't have to start doing complicated traces. So from our point light, we're going to change the intensity. So on our viewport, let's just click on. It's essentially this value that we're changing here. So any of these values that we can see, we can actually deal with. So back into my event graph, I'm just going to drag out from this and just type in set. And we should have it there, set intensity. Okay. So I'm going to script this through. So this is getting our point light. We're going to trigger this off. So that's going to trigger off straight away, and it's going to set the intensity of the light. So the new intensity there, at the minute, it would just set this to 0 every time it started. We don't want that, so we want a random number coming into this. So if I just right click, I'm going to start typing random, and we want to float, and I want this random float in range, which is going to give us 2 values, and it's going to give us a random value between those 2 values. So between 0, I'll light off, and let's say something like 1200. And you can set that value to whatever you want there. So that's how strong the light will be. Let's drag this and let's put this into this new value there. Okay, so that's our new intensity. So from there, what we're going to do is we're now going to get a reference to our dynamic material. We can do this by using this variable we set here. So remember, we stored this dynamic variable inside this variable. So I'm going to drag this out. I'm going to choose a get, or we can control drag that out as well. I'm going to get this, and what we want from this, let's drag this out. We want to find a property from this material that we created. So if you remember, we set up, let me just bring this in. So it was this bulb light. Just going to bring both of these in for a second. Let's just drag this in here. So this is the one we had, and this was the parameter we set up called emissive strength, and that's what we want to use. Okay, and just to get this, I'm going to get this, click on this, just highlight this parameter name. I'm just going to Control C that. I'm going to copy it to make it be easier. It needs to be, I think it's not case sensitive, but the rest of the name has to be exactly the same. So let's go back here. I'm going to drag out, and what we're going to do is we're going to use a set scalar parameter value. That's the one we want. So the parameter name, this is the one I've just copied into the clipboard. So I'm going to paste that in. So it's emissive strength. So that's the material parameter that we're using from there. Okay, from our material that we created. So we've got that. We can plug that into here. So it's going to go in, it's going to give us a random value between 0 and 1200. It's going to set the intensity of the light. It's going to go through and it's going to set the intensity or the value of this emissive strength, which is going to times by our emissive color. So that's going to do our glow. Okay. So now we just need to make this repeat. So I'm going to add a delay onto this. So it's going to delay by a certain amount, and then I'm going to cycle round again. So the duration, again, rather than just having this one value, I'm going to put a random in here. So I could just take this one actually and Control W, oops, Shift W, did that without thinking, Control W, which just copies that wherever the mouse is. So the values here, I'm going to have it between 0 seconds and say 0.3. Again, you could change those values. I'm going to plug that into there. So that's our random value. So it's going to go through here. It's going to set the intensity based on these. It's going to grab the scalar parameter. And actually, we just need to drag this value out of here. So what we're getting from the random float, I can also put that into this value here for the emissive. It's going to go through the delay and wait. And then we're going to actually have this so that when the delay is completed, it's going to come back out and start triggering off the set intensity again. So this is going to loop round essentially within there. Okay, so get to the end, come back, we set a new custom value, we go through, we set the emissive material, and then we delay again and keep going back through that cycle. Okay, so let's compile, save that. Everything should be okay. It's linking around, you see it's looping around on that. Okay, so let's see if this works. And there we go. So that's the emissive glow coming out, and that's also the strength of the light as well, all within that one class. Now another thing you could do on this, because obviously we're using quite large values here, so 0 to 1200. If you don't want values that strong for your emissive color, we could always take this into a maths function. Let me take this up and just drag it out of the way. Excuse me. So we could do something like a float times float. Could get the value out here, for example, and we could maybe times that by 0.5. So we get half the strength of the value. Plug that in. So if we're getting 1200 out of here, then we're going to be pushing 600 into the emissive here. Let's compile and save. And it won't really be that much different, but we're just not putting as much into the emissive material. We're just scaling that value down a little bit. Okay. But there we go. Okay. So that's setting up the emissive strength based on a random value, which is also triggering off the light as well. I hope that's been useful. Thank you.